Hello, thank you for being here. Sorry about the delay. Um, Silly old laptop. Um, yes, my name's Anthony Hortin. I'm up from Melbourne. Um, I'm a designer slash developer, uh, primarily building themes and plugins for clients. I'm also the author of Easy WP Guide, which is an easy to read WordPress manual some of you may have heard of as well. So today, I'm just talking about developing for the customizer. I'm guessing most of you here because you come into this here fairly technical, most of you probably know what the customizer is. The theme customization API. Is that right? Sorry, I was on the wrong side, sorry. The theme customization API allows developers to customize and add controls to the appearance customize admin screen. Even for themes that don't actually add anything to the customizer itself, there's certain core features that are built in to the customizer. Things like site identity, menus, widgets, static front page, and since WordPress 4.7, you've now got an additional CSS box which you can, add in some custom CSS to your theme. One of the issues I have with the customizer is the lack of decent documentation. According to the official theme handbook, you should basically study all the core code. In my opinion, you shouldn't have to study through code to learn an API. And you certainly shouldn't have to go searching through all the core code just to learn an API. The lack of the documentation is one of the reasons why I started writing up a developer's guide for the customizer, or for developing for the customizer, I should say. There are basically four main types of customizer objects. The first one is panels. Panels are the containers for sections. They allow you to group multiple sections together. So as you can see there, we've got a number of different sections. Sections is the area where your controls actually reside. Sections typically contain multiple controls. So as you can see there, we've got multiple controls, check boxes, lists, or drop-down lists, text areas, things like that. And then there's the actual settings and controls. Settings associate controls with the settings that are saved in the database, and controls are the actual UI elements. So things like checkboxes, drop-down pages, selects, radio buttons, text areas, things like that. Now, to add anything to the customizer, you need to use the customize register action hook. This hook gives you access to the WP customize object, and it's this class that actually controls the customizer screen. You need to add your panels, sections, settings, and controls, including any custom controls that you create, within a function used by the customize register hook. Panels allow you to group multiple sections together. Sections don't need to be nested under a panel, but they can be if you want. Panels must contain at least one section, which in turn must contain at least one control before it would actually be displayed in the customizer. So if you're developing for it and you're just creating a section and you want to see, well, did this work? It's probably not going to work until you actually create an actual control. So adding a setting and a control, and like a checkbox, for example, it won't actually display until you add them as well. To create a panel, you call add panel, add underscore panel. In the arguments, you can specify things like title and description and a priority. Sections are where your controls will actually reside. You'll typically have multiple controls in each section, and sections can be added to panels, but in most cases, it's not actually necessary. You call add section to create your section, and in the arguments, again, you can specify things like item or title, description, and the panel if necessary. Settings and control work together. So settings handle live previewing, saving, and the sanitization of the customizer object. And each control that you register needs to have a matching setting. If you're developing themes for the WordPress.org theme directory, it's actually mandatory that you have to put in or specify a sanitization function. When you using add settings, the sanitization argument, if you like, is actually optional. But as I said, if you're developing a theme for WordPress.org to sit in their theme directory, then you actually need to make sure you specify a sanitization function. You call add setting to create your setting. When you add a setting, you can specify a default value, and a transport, among a number of different things. The transport is basically how the live preview refreshes. And as I mentioned, even though the sanitize callback parameter is optional, if you're submitting a theme, you have to actually specify a sanitization function. Controls are the actual UI elements that modify your theme settings. There are a number of basic controls, or a number of built-in controls, I should say. Things like checkboxes, select lists, radio buttons. For all other controls, you need to extend the WP Customize Control class, and by doing that, you can create your own custom controls. There are several core controls that are ready to use straight out of the box. As I mentioned, you've got text field, checkbox, text area, radio buttons, select lists, and drop-down pages. Drop-down pages actually automatically populates the select list with all your pages inside. Later versions of WP also introduced the color, media, imaged, and the cropped image controls. The next half a dozen slides or so are fairly similar, so I'm going to go through them pretty quickly, just pointing out some of the differences. You call add control to basically create all your controls, so whether you're talking about a checkbox, a text area, or whatever. For the input control, so just your standard input field, the type can either be text, email, URL, number, hidden, or date. You can specify a label and description and which section it should be added to. You can also pass it with the input control. You can also pass a list of custom input attributes for controlling outputs such as class, style, and placeholder. These input attributes can only be used for the input field and the text area controls. Again, for checkboxes, we're calling add control again, and we just change the type to checkbox. Select, same thing. This time type is select. Select controls can be passed an array of choices. So obviously the drop-down choices. The choice array is only used for the select and radio controls. So for the radio button control, the type would be radio. And as I mentioned, like select controls, you can pass an array of choices, so you pass an array of all your radio button options. The drop-down pages control, as I mentioned before, is basically a select list. It gives you a list of all your pages and posts on your site. So it's nice and handy. You don't have to actually do any queries to retrieve all that. And all you do, you set the type to drop-down pages. For the text area control, the type should be text area. Like the input control, you can also pass a list of custom input attributes for controlling the output. So you can pass in things like styles as well if you want like a custom style, for example, for a checkbox. For a text area. For the color control, the type will be color. As you've seen, that's why I'm sort of doing quickly, a lot of the attributes are all very similar. For the media control, you need to pass in a new WP customized media control class. The MIND type specifies what media you're asking for. It can be image, audio, video, application, or text. And there's also an image control. For that, you need to pass in a new WP customized image control class. And you can also pass in an array of button labels as well, so you can specify or change the default labels on the buttons that you see. And lastly, for the cropped image control, you pass in a new WP customized cropped image control class. For this control, as well as the label and description, you can also specify the width and height, or you can specify whether the width and height is flexible when the image is cropped, as well as the actual width and height of the image itself. Whenever you're accepting data from users, the number one rule is trust nobody. It's always important when you're sanitizing your data, or that you sanitize your data, especially if that data has been saved back to your database. As I mentioned earlier, it's worth mentioning again. If you're submitting a theme to WordPress.org theme directory, it's part of their requirement that every setting must specify a sanitization function. If you're using the theme check plugin, which you should be if you're submitting a theme, it will actually show you or prompt you if you've missed that out. It will come up as an error. The type of sanitizing will obviously depend on the type of data you're expecting. So sanitizing an email obviously different than sanitizing just a standard text field. For a simple text field, you could use something like the WordPress function sanitize text field, which will strip all the tags, remove line breaks, tabs, and extra white space. So WordPress itself has a number of sanitization functions that are available for you to use straight out of the box rather than writing one yourself. Use the sanitize callback argument when adding a setting to specify the sanitization function. You can also add your controls to existing sections. So rather than creating your own section, it's basically identical to adding settings and controls to your own section. The only difference is the section argument. So when you use add control, so over on the bottom right, you can see I've just added a section argument, and you just specify the section that you want to put it in. One of the benefits of the customizer is the live preview window. There's two ways in which you can update the preview window. A full refresh is a refresh of the whole page, and a partial refresh is a refresh of just part of the page. The default preview refresh in the customizer is the full page refresh. So if you don't actually specify the transport argument, then you'll just by default for that control, you'll get a full page refresh. You specify the type of refresh with the transport argument when adding your setting, and you pass it either refresh or post message. With partial refreshes, you also have two options. Option A is using PHP and Ajax. To use PHP function to refresh your window via Ajax, you need to register a partial using add_partial. Option B to refresh the screen is using jQuery. You can include a script for your customizer using customize_preview_init action hook, and then bind your jQuery function to the control that you want to update. If you're not satisfied with any of the built-in controls, UI controls, you can actually create your own custom controls. When registering custom controls, you either use the customize register action hook, or you can simply check for the existence of the WP customized control class. So to create our custom control, you extend the WP customized control class. You can display your own HTML content for the control by overriding the render content function. And you can also enqueue your CSS and any JavaScript files by overriding the enqueue function. As an example, custom control, we create a class called My Awesome Custom Control, which extends the WP Customize control. As I mentioned before, we'd use the enqueue function to enqueue all our scripts and styles, and we use the render content function to display our custom HTML for that particular control. We also give our class a type using the type variable. And obviously you'd keep that different from any of the default ones. You use custom controls in exactly the same way as you use the default built-in controls. So first you add a setting and then you add the control. The only difference is that we have to specify our new class that we actually created. Using a sample custom control, we call add setting. Then we call add control, passing the custom control class that we created previously. This is something that actually stumped me for a number of weeks. When creating custom controls, if you start using jQuery to dynamically alter the content or the control content, say for example, you're creating a repeater where you've got multiple fields that you can drag and drop, or you might be creating a slider control. You might find that the save, when you're doing that dynamically using jQuery, you might find that the save button at the top of the customizer won't enable. I know I certainly did. You need to trigger, or you need to make sure you trigger a change event for that control. I'm adding this in because it literally took me weeks to find. It was a bugger. And finally, after you've got everything, to retrieve your customizer settings and use them in your theme, you just use the get theme mod function. You pass the ID of the setting and also a default value in case the value doesn't exist already in the database. So in the example there, you can see it's basically, and then echoing out the theme setting with the ID of background color. And if that doesn't exist, then it returns the default value, which is just white or FFF instead. Here's a number of links that's worth looking at. First one is the theme options or the customized API on the WordPress.org theme handbook. There's also always some interesting posts on the customized tag on Make WordPress Core. I've also coded up, I've got my, actually there's also a link, I should say, for data sanitizing, some really useful information there for sanitizing and escaping all your data. I've also put a GitHub link up there for you as well. I've coded up some custom controls such as sliders, repeaters, some fancier checkboxes and radio buttons such as like using images rather than just a standard sort of radio button or checkbox. It's basically a matter. There's also some, I was going to say, there's also, I'll put in some example code there for just using the default controls in that as well. So it's pretty much just a matter of copying and pasting into your theme if you want to have a play around with it. I mentioned before as well, obviously you're looking at code here. It's most of you probably, it's hard to read being on the overhead, and it goes pretty quick. I've written up a 2-part developer's guide for the customizer. So it goes through all this and basically a lot more and shows all the examples and everything like that. So you might find that a lot more useful if you actually want to do some development for the customizer. And that's it. Not Ryan. Yes, you can save. One of the options in the add setting allows you to save it as a theme mod, which is typically used for just theme customizations, like specific customizations. In other words, if you change a theme, um, you won't get access to it. But yes, there's also sort of global settings that you can set there as well. You can do, I mean, you can put as many as you want. Personally, I'm of the belief that you wouldn't add a whole heap. I mean, I've seen themes, I won't name them, that literally have a dozen different sections have added in, and you're scrolling for like 2-3 pages of options. My own personal belief is that sort of less is more. I'd rather provide some options for flexibility, but not sort of overwhelm everyone. I mean, everyone's probably seen themes from marketplaces and stuff like that where it literally takes you, 3 hours to set up because you got, obviously might not be customized and stuff, but obviously got, literally dozens and dozens of theme options. So I mean, it's up to you how much you want to put into the customizer, obviously, but I sort of tend to sort of go less rather than putting heaps and heaps and heaps in, personally. It's obviously going to depend on the theme you're building, so, Yes, in the code that I mentioned on GitHub, um, back on there, I've written up some custom controls for sliders, a repeater. The repeater allows you to get like in the one that I created, it allows you to get like social icon URLs. You, yeah, kind of. Yeah, you can basically add a new field, add a URL in. You can drag and drop it. So yeah, or reorder it. Delete a field if you need. I've also added some fancy checkboxes, so like an image checkbox rather than just a normal little button, and same with radio buttons, so you can add like an image radio button and also some other sort of fancier text ones. Um, so yeah, that's all in the code on the GitHub. And as I mentioned, there's also some, even if you don't want to use the custom controls, there's some example code in there just to how to use the actual default built-in ones as well. And I've tried to keep it fairly sort of separated so you can see which one's which, and lots of documentation in the code, so hopefully it should be helpful. Um, Obviously the WordPress sort of, I suppose, standard now is just putting everything into the customizer rather than, or that's the preferred method of putting things into the customizer rating rather than, rather than creating your own sort of theme options pages. And I mean, that was one of the whole reasons behind creating the customizer in the start, to get away from having, 100 different things with 100 different theme option pages, which, again, as I mentioned, helps with the theme review team. They don't have to review all these hundreds of different theme option pages. So yes, I would, certainly be adding stuff into the customizer now rather than creating your own sort of custom theme options. It does. It as you can see the code there, it can you do have to add quite a bit of code to do the bare minimum. But as I said, it's probably it is the better way to go, and more people are getting used to the customizer. And it's changed a lot since it was originally brought in, and it's certainly going to change a lot. It'll well, maybe not a lot, but it'll probably change significantly over the next year or so, as they bring in Gutenberg and do other bits and pieces to WordPress core. I'll talk to you later. It's better than before I started. I mean, I mean, I'm not a huge fan of the customizer. I will say that. I have a number of issues with just the UI and the limited space and the layout of controls and stuff like that. There are some really good, useful things with the customizer, as I mentioned before, like things like live previewing. That can be really handy. With the live previewing, though, it's amazing the number of people that don't realise that you can actually click around in the live preview itself. So they'll bring out the customizer and they'll change the options, and basically they'll just be previewing the homepage because they don't actually realise that you can actually click in live preview. So you might want to preview the blog page, for example. So you click on blog or whatever. So yeah, as I said, I get the feeling that customizer is going to change over a little bit over sort of the next year or so. Hopefully the UI improves, but yeah, well, as I said, you can keep an eye on things on core posts, use a customizer tag core, or make WordPress, I should say. And they have a lot of interesting stuff there with regards to what they sort of plan on doing and stuff. Ooh.